Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chambers Wales Constructing the Future webinar. We've got a great panel here today. Great opportunities for people to ask questions, but there is some housekeeping around this. And that is, if you could use the Q&A function, the chat function, to ask any questions, and we can raise those as part of the discussion topics for today. The session is being recorded today, and my name is Mark Dacey, and I'm the Principal and Chief Exec of the NPTC Group of Colleges, and I will be chairing the webinar today. So we only have an hour set aside, so I'm going to move straight to questions, and the first question is to Helen Higgs. And Helen will give a very brief introduction to herself before she asks the question. So Helen, welcome. And the question I've got for you to start the webinar today is, how important do you think it is to really know about the project pipeline? Because obviously this is going to affect future planning.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Helen Higgs. I am Head of Construction Skills Capability for EDF Nuclear New Build. So I work across Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C, which is still in development. And I'm also on the board of the National College for Nuclear. So Mark, just to go back to the question, how important is it to know about the project pipeline? I think all of us involved, whichever side you're on, whether you're trying to manage the risk of a project or actually deliver some of the scope as a supply chain member, what you really need is some element of certainty, both to mitigate the risk around workforce, both the quality and the quantity, the number and the standards. So I think you know, that by knowing that, it allows early enough collaboration between education providers to look at how their curriculum face the needs. And it also allows supply chain to invest with a little bit more certainty. So I think it all starts from an element of construction and infrastructure pipeline view from governments. I think that allows that to happen, and I think by doing that and by agreeing common languages around jobs and standards, we can really allow the UK workforce to fulfil the projects that we're going to be talking about, rather than to looking elsewhere. But I'm sure we'll cover more during the conversation.
Yes, fair comment, Helen. Okay, well then, that would lead me on, and if I can bring David in on this question, if I can, leading on, I suppose, from the project pipeline, David, there's been a sort of attitude, I suppose, in parts of the sector that just because you can't do the job, it doesn't stop you from actually winning a job. So how does the industry move away from this mindset to really focus on competency?
I think that's a very good point. Just to introduce myself, my name is David Freeze. I'm Group Chief Executive of BESA, which is the Building Engineering Services Association. So they represent mainly mechanical and electrical contractors in the commercial side. So companies like TMB, Narberths, FP Hurley in Wales, or Lawn Stewart would be our members. The fact you can't do a job never stopped you winning a job in construction is a source of huge frustration, I think, to our members and contractors generally, in that we can go through myriad of PQQ processes that cost the industry millions of pounds in admin and administration and paperwork, but actually it's about the bottom line. If you come in with a price that's acceptable, you've got a shout to win the job. And then generally they work out how they're going to do the job once they've won it. And the problem in construction is often that, well, not often, always, is actually you don't know what you don't know. And finding out what you don't know costs you a lot of money and can cost your clients a lot of pain as you learn the lessons. I know this from personal experience. I used to install ground source heat pumps, and in the first years of doing them, I learned an awful lot of stuff I didn't know, and couldn't read in textbooks. I think Grenfell was a huge wake-up call to the whole industry, and still is. And evidence of competence and compliance will be a requirement. Certainly, I know the Building Safety Act is England-based, but it will bleed into Wales as well, I'm sure. But you, I think, as a contractor, will have to start to evidence to a greater degree, are you competent? Are you compliant as a company? And that will apply at a company level, but also as an individual. So as an individual, you're coming to site to do something. How do I know you can actually strangle pipework into a plant room or fit ventilation ductwork to the required standard? And I think that'll be a combination of legislation that will require that, but also the insurance market, I think, are increasingly, they've had a very good wake-up call from listening to the Grenfell inquiry and now fully understand what the industry does, or rather doesn't do. And therefore, we'll see an increase in premiums for those who can't evidence that, and also a restriction on the cover that you will get. And I think another area will be in clients will start to demand it because they have some skin in the game. In the Hackett review, she said that clients must understand their responsibilities and feel that responsibility. And once we see a few clients getting prosecuted because of their failure to do due diligence, then they will start to do it. And I think their funders, who have the requirements of environmental, social and governance requirements increasingly playing a role in this, will start to insist as part of the funding it comes with these requirements. So whether or not we like it or want to change, there will be change. And the majority of the industry, I think, will go with that. There will always be an element who will always not go with that, who will always be outliers, shall we say, and those are the people we need to drive out of the industry. So a long answer, but yeah. I think we definitely need these people to be out of the industry. The fact you can't do a job should never allow you to do a job.
No, it's true, David, and you know, Grenfell, you know, we've seen so many things as a result of Grenfell, and I know, I think one of the recent surveys around fire doors, the outcome was that 65% of fire doors are just doors. They do not perform as fire doors because they've been badly installed. So really,
I think, Mark, that sadly, to many in the industry, Grenfell is in another country. It doesn't exist. Literally, yeah, they don't really follow what's happened there. They're not. Listening to what's happening, and you don't pick up the lessons if you don't.
No. And I think some of the lessons for us to learn, you know, around planning some of this process. And let me push a question to Nick here. Nick, we've seen an amazing rise in the use of sustainable and modular construction. But really, what changes do you think need to be made to the planning and time scale of these future projects to help this process?
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick Evans, Managing Director and founder of Everbuild. We're a nationwide civil engineering and groundworks contractor based in Mid Wales. And our predominant market is working in the modular sector, which I'm glad to say is a growing sector. For me, Mark, it's all about early engagement. I think the concept of modular is really gaining traction in the marketplace now. And what we find is the modular elements is a very quick process, but the civils and groundworks elements, whether it be modular or traditional build, still remains constant. So for us, what we actively engage with our clients is early involvement to ascertain ground conditions, site conditions, and we really like feeding into that process as early on as possible to try and impart our knowledge and experience into advising and utilising the ground conditions as best as what we can. What we find is within the industry on some projects, some larger projects where the design elements has taken place, perhaps sometimes without designers even having visited site. And you can glean an awful lot of knowledge from actually having visited site and utilising ground conditions and the positive points on site into the design process. So we actively go to site early doors ourselves, carry out our own surveys, and we try and feed back wherever we're allowed to our own knowledge into the design process to try and utilise it, streamline it, and make it as efficient as possible. And that breeds into the whole efficiency of the modular concept.
There's been a lot of talk about engaging contractors in the design process and you know, some movement towards it, but nowhere near enough, Nick. And I think you know, we do talk about, you know, getting things done just in time almost, you know, and if I can bring Ed in on this and just to move that forward, Ed, if possible, there's been what I've just referred to, I suppose, a just-in-time attitude also in the skills adoption. You know, everything's done just in time. So how do we move to get, you know, perhaps ahead of the curve in terms of skills, and particularly those areas which are at the moment currently in a research and development phase? So how do we bring the two together? How do we get in front of that?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And good morning. I'm Ed Evans, the Director of the Civil Engineering Contractors Association in Wales. I suppose this is the holy grail to a certain extent, Mark, in terms of skills development and just avoiding that boom-bust scenario, you know, where everybody's trying to get hold of the same people with the same skills at the same time in not much time. There's no doubt we've heard about the lack of or a limited pipeline and that certainty, that lack of planning ahead. It is a problem, but you know, I think there are certain things we're never going to get this perfect. You know, let's admit that. But bottom line is, it takes time to develop people, particularly in our sector. It's not something you could just drop people into and train them up in a couple of months, and so there's a long lead-in period for that. But I think the focus on core skills is there anyway. It has to be. You know, we will have different ways of doing things in future, whether it be increased use of AI, you know, automated plant and drones and all those things. That's fine. It will be there, but we need the core skills in people, and we can add on those other things very, very quickly, or relatively quickly, I should say, as is required. But I think, you know, we go back to the basics here. Companies need to take on apprentices and bring them through that route. You know, those core skills. Every business should be doing this, and the good ones are doing this anyway. But you can only provide work experience and an apprenticeship if you've got that work. So, you know, there's going to be a core level where you get to, but anything above that, we need a slightly different approach. I think, you know, there are some successful shared apprenticeship schemes out there where you can bring people on and move them around to suit the work if you're not confident as a business that you've got the work. I think as well, we need to make far more use of the social value concept, the whole thing. We put, you know, we see clients putting lots of clauses into things saying you will do this and you will take on this many apprentices. It needs a bit more than that. And I'd like to see something explicit in contracts where contractors and consultants are paid to take somebody on over and above their core level of apprentices. So there's no perfect approach to this, but we need a collaborative approach on this. It can't be just pass things down to the supply chain anymore. We need to see a lot more of a collaborative approach from clients. And I think, you know, the aftermath of COVID, the recovery of COVID, you know, there are great opportunities here, but we need that push on proper work experience, proper placements for young people, because, you know, this is a great industry. And young people need that experience and jobs as things stand. So not a perfect answer, Mark, but no, I think, you know, there's lots of things we could do.
Yeah, and as an ex-apprentice in the industry myself, I know, you know, colleges can't deliver an apprenticeship. They can help deliver the apprenticeship. It is massively about the work experience and that tripartite arrangement between the apprentice, the employer, and the training provider, really, because they're private providers and colleges. providing this. So the skills, fundamentally what we're talking about is a key core skill and additional skills added to it. So on that sort of line, can I bring James in? And I know with the RSL area, I mean, you were dealing with, I suppose, substantial numbers of old housing stock, James, and you know what I would say to you is, well, old housing stock, it's easy to upgrade, isn't it? And we've already got all the skills that we need to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Mark. So yeah, James Griffiths, Head of Development at Coastal Housing Association. And yeah, obviously I'm very much from the end user side here in regards to boots on the ground, I guess. And the skills shortage is a real concern out there for the industry. Even with modern methods of construction coming on board, we still need to do something. And I think what has happened over the last 10, 20 years is that the industry has become very transient, and we, I think, as sometimes the client, rely upon our supply chain to deliver the apprenticeships, but sometimes that carpentry contractor can only probably see 12 months in front of him. He can't see 3 years in front of him. And as a previous apprentice carpenter myself, you know, I've come up through that ranks. I do think that there is a a bit more of a root issue here as well, in terms of the education system, and that I think apprenticeships are not seen as an opportunity like they were when I was, you know, I'm 44 now, when I was 16, you know, me and a load of my mates, that was the route that we went down, as opposed to going to university and further education. That's what we all did. And we've all had a good career come out the end of it. And I think there is something missing there. And I think there is greater engagement with some of the younger adults coming out of the education system to say, look, this is a role and this is a great industry to be in. What concerns me, and it's interesting, I was on one of our new build developments a few weeks ago, and it struck me that I was stood on site, and when I was looking around, all of the tradespeople that were on site were in excess of 50 years old. And that is a concern. You're looking, thinking, where do we go 10 years from here? You know, that site is, you know, it is a concern. So yeah, I think engagement with the education system and real, I think us as the client, or the client side, need to take a bit more of a pivotal role in taking forward apprentices. And something that Ed just raised there, and I think is a really good point, is the shared apprenticeship scheme, which I think is something that we really need to start looking into in greater detail.
Thanks very much, James. Yeah, and I agree with you totally. There's some great questions coming in, guys, and one which references, I mean, Ed was talking about the shared apprenticeship scheme, and we shouldn't forget Cyfle and what Cyfle are doing. It's certainly around the South Wales area, and some brilliant examples of shared apprenticeship schemes working really well in that area. But there's a couple of questions that have come in, and I'll try to appreciate really. I mean, the construction playbook lays out best practices and sector reforms that are going to create a more effective construction industry, and obviously describes MMC as a route to transforming how we deliver public works projects by providing those complete alternatives to traditional delivery. The question goes on to talk about providing significant improvements in productivity and efficiency and in quality. So what is the panel's view on MMC as the way forward, guys? Offsite production and...
I come in on that, Mark?
Yes, of course, Nick. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, leading with many of the leading MMC manufacturers and contractors in the UK. I believe MMC, when it is done correctly, it is 100% the way forward. And I really think it is starting to shake off the poor image it perhaps had of your old portable classrooms on a playground in a school, and the industry is still sort of slightly tarnished by that image. But these buildings now are far come on, many steel frame, some timber frame. The quality is equal to more traditional methods of construction. But the beauty is again when the design is right, that the efficiencies and the sustainability really is good. When it works, all trades working in a factory environment, which again you can bring lean methodologies into the process. So there's a theoretically good cost saving, especially with standardization of designs. You've got all trades working in a dry, theoretically clean environment, which can only be positive especially in the British winter time. I'm sure trades would rather be working in an indoor sort of heated arena as opposed to a dirty site. So the theory is right, and the leading providers in the industry are really throwing some buildings out there now which just they're eye-catching. They got the longevity, 60-year guarantees on them. So for me, I'm convinced that is the way forward. But it goes back, the design process has got to be right. Integrating BIM into it to make it a seamless design process, and it's making sure that all the stakeholders buy into the design as well. And that includes, from specifically from our side, which can sometimes be forgotten. MMC still requires dirty trades on site, to put it in layman's terms. It still requires holes excavated in the ground, etc. So, but bringing in that collaborative discussion early doors can really make for a highly efficient and cost-effective solution for the clients.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. David, what about building engineering services in terms of MMC there? Does that work for you?
Yes, it does, and DFMA. But the critical point is the design, and the design is difficult. There's always a rush to get on site. So governments of all colours talk about shovel-ready projects, and a shovel-ready project would sort of suggest that you've designed enough to dig a hole, and then you start building. And as soon as you do that, you get out of that DFMA, you get out of MMC into hurry-scurry build and design. So provided there is sufficient time to do the design, then it works very well. And quite often, though, there's the illusion of sufficient time because they'll employ consultants to do a design of a building that actually the client can never afford. So by the time it goes out to tender, you've worked out you can't afford it. You're then into value engineering, and we all know what that means. And then you're already on site, but you've already had this design time that's gone up in smoke on a building you could never afford. So I'm slightly cynical, but actually when it works well, it works really well. But it needs a change of attitude, a change of behaviours from clients, I think, as well, and funders. Yeah. Actually, we won't be digging that hole in the ground for another 8 months because we're actually going to build a model first that's properly designed before we start the physical build.
Yeah, that's a fair comment there. Helen, the nuclear industry then?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I could pick up some points from probably each member of the panel has made. I think in terms of early involvement, I think by having the early involvement at the design stage, you also obviously start to impact the skills, the employment and skills workforce planning. So as I think it was Ed said, that you've got to look at ways to do this. It might be a cost implication for the project. So be it. Early contractor involvement is really important, and I know that we've had formal and informal early contractor engagement, and it has really started to show dividends, especially where you're working with designs that are developing. I think that's the developing new, so I think that's absolutely critical for nuclear, where the safety element for all of us, safety is always important. And the scrutiny involved in a major project like Hinkley Point C, you know, the external scrutiny is huge. So driving schedule and maintaining quality. So I think that ECI bit is really important, and it starts to support you know, the points that have been made around how you can be innovative around things like traineeships, driving the pipelines through early enough, because if you want new pipelines of people who are transferring industries or coming out of education, the social economic bit, if you really want to drive change, you've got to put it in a contract. Collaboration is so important, but it has to be accompanied by the contractual piece, and that's what we've been trying to balance without overpricing the project, because that's the balance that you're working with.
Okay, thanks, Helen. And if I come to David and James, I mean, in civil engineering, we've been using design for manufacturing and assembly for years, haven't we? And I suppose, James, similarly in the housing market, you know, in the late 70s when timber frame first probably started being used within the UK. So any additional comments on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that in terms of MMC construction is that at the moment it really does have its place in terms of 100% affordable schemes, where sometimes there is a struggle. Sometimes is in terms of open market, because most developers work on return on capital employed. So you're not starting with a 100-unit scheme and building 100 units on day one. You're building 10, selling 5 of them, and building the next 10. So it is a hurdle that's the reason why some of the PLCs are resisting it in some respects. But it's something that we need to break that barrier down. I think also as well, just picking up the point in terms of early engagement and the design team, things have changed immeasurably over the last 10 years, whereas before the design team you'd start off with an architect and get that ball rolling. Now you're starting the ball rolling initially with a sustainability consultant and an engineer who understands your sustainable drainage strategy, and then you're plotting the buildings around that. So I think things have changed, and early engagement is almost a default now on all development sites. I think that one of the frustrations, and in the real world, the planning frustrations in terms of gaining planning and that bottleneck that you end up with of waiting to get through the planning process and your statutory consultees, is this reason why we almost need to be shovel ready. And it's that backlog, it's that bottlenecking of not being able to quite hit that end date to get on site, and we're all under pressure. So we have to try and get to a point where we're not rushing at the end to get on site and make sure we got the design right. That's the issue.
Fair comment, and I'm sure with some of the repetitive designs that we see, and we could be shovel ready, although I know there's a number of architects on the call today who may well disagree with that repetitive design. But Ed, anything additional in terms of the civil sector?
Yeah, Mark, I mean, you've made mention that in the civils market, we've been doing sort of off-site manufacturing for a long time, and even down to the Grangetown bypass down in Cardiff, you know, there was an off-site factory built right by it. So it's been part of the DNA to a certain extent. But I think just picking up on a few points that have been made, I think that the planning issue is quite right that James raises. You know, it's planning and development control. It should be planning and development management, you know, because we should be looking to manage these processes rather than controlling them, which just doesn't give the right feeling, I don't think.
Ed,
I think sometimes
I remember being introduced to a planner, I won't say which county and so on, who introduced themselves as the planning enforcement officer. Well, that doesn't go down particularly well sometimes, does it?
I think culturally there is an issue there, regardless, you know. I think there is an issue as well with some of the business models of the different components that put together a project. You know, the business model of the client, the consultant, the contractor can be quite different, and that's not helpful at times either, particularly in terms of getting early collaboration. I think the other thing that we perhaps haven't touched on too much now, we've spoken a lot about design early on, but risk and how risk is perceived and where, you know, who gets the risk, who has to deal with it. That can be, or that is, a massive inhibitor to some of the things that we're talking about here, unless we have far more open discussions about this and how best to manage that risk. Because if you don't get that right, the rest just doesn't follow. So yeah, a few little pointers there from what everybody said, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. I want to ask a couple of questions around procurement in a minute, but we've had a couple of questions come in around skills and some of the comments we made about having, you know, a central core of skills and some add-on skills, and a number of questions are heading towards this question. Do we need more cross-sectoral understanding as well as specialist core stroke individual skills as part of our, you know, our future workforce then? I mean, I remember being told that you need to know the next trade after you and what that next trade is going to do to be able to do your own trade properly. And I think that's something that has been through the industry for many, many years. But, you know, when you talk about that cross-sectoral understanding, you know, that sort of technical aspect of it, that understanding, do people think that that's something that we should get built into our qualifications? Yeah, go on, Ed.
Yeah, I look, a few years back, I was working in a local authority environment. I won't say which one, but had responsibility then, sort of shifted from civils more into the building side, and it did amaze me actually how constrained some of the roles between an architect, sorry David, a business services, building services engineer as well, and the surveyors, how it was quite compartmentalized. And I think there is great value really in having that overview of what everybody is doing. And you're quite right, you know, who's coming in after me? If I put this bit of plaster at the end, I'm going to get an electrician drilling a hole through it. Those simple things, but they make such a difference to the flow of a project, you know? So I would say for sure.
Thanks.
Mark, could I? Yeah, sorry, just raising a hand. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I agree completely. I think I sort of looked at that question and saw two elements to it really, but just to touch on the point that's just been covered, I think that's right. I mean, if I think about what we're doing, we've got different trades operating in very small spaces. And as you described, you run the risk, as if they were operating in your own home independently, that you run the risk of them having to undo what the last person has just done in order to do their job. So we have, in conjunction with, you know, ECITB and others, we've set up mock-ups where, you know, the trades can work together, and we've taken the lessons, and again we've had to do this from previous builds internationally, so we're taking mock-ups where they can work together and you know, see how they can operate in that small space and most effectively. But if I could just very briefly, you know, the cross-sectoral piece, I think that's so important. We've been working with CITB, ECITB, renewables to understand the, if you like, the segue where we have similar needs, similar issues around standards and capacity, because you don't always need to reinvent the wheel. And it's just sometimes it's just amending, working together on curriculum to amend, go forward. But just to emphasize, it helps, we've been working intergovernment on it, and it helps if government give us some indication, particularly on large projects, of a 10-year pipeline. Yeah,
fair comment. David?
Yeah, I think very good points. If you just look at the net zero requirement, then as a building services engineer, it should be fabric first. So you may be designing or doing yourself out of a job, but actually if you can do it through fabric, you need to have an appreciation of what can be done, how it can be done, reducing the requirement there for energy and carbon. So yes, I think that's fundamental that you have a really better understanding across the piece.
Thanks, David. Thanks. Guys, one pressing issue, should I say, in the industry that we haven't discussed today is always procurement. And I want to ask a general question to you all. The way that we do things needs to adapt. We know that there needs to be changes. There always are changes, but our current procurement processes, I mean, are they just a hindrance or a blocker to introducing any of the innovation that we are talking about and any of the longer term thinking? What's your views just generally on the current procurement process and how that is either assisting or the opposite in terms of our sector?
Shall I answer that?
Who wants to go?
Yeah, do you want to answer that, Mark?
Yeah, go on, James.
I think one of the issues that I have with the procurement process is that, particularly in Wales, we're fishing from quite a small pond in some ways in regards to contractors. And what we seem to have is we have this issue of a bit of a, dare I say, sometimes a bit of a smash and grab, where you have large contractors coming over, doing some work and coming and going back and leaving again. I think our procurement sometimes is biased towards using larger contractors, and we are turning our backs perhaps on the SMEs. And then the larger contractors then are engaging with the SMEs and ultimately the ones who are carrying out the hard work on a day-to-day basis. But the issue is with that is that, you know, being from a contracting side originally, to fill out some of the pre-tender documents, you need to have somebody sat there full time, and some of these SMEs just don't have that luxury. You know, they sometimes the person who's filling out that application is also the managing director, who's also the commercial director, who is also the operations director. They're everything. And I think that's something that we really need to reflect on. And we use the word of engaging with SMEs, and I sometimes think that is a bit of lip service. I think we really now need to understand how we engage with them properly and actually stop using the larger organizations. Larger organizations have their place, by the way. I'm not saying that they don't, but I think sometimes we do turn our back on the SME.
I was with a contractor last week who when we were talking about, you know, local tendering and local lists, said they just don't bother.
They don't bother.
There's so much bureaucracy involved in the process that they just don't bother.
Yeah.
And a really good quality with a great reputation. You know, so it's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Anyone else?
Yeah, for us, Mark, the most successful projects are where we're seen more as a partner as opposed to a subcontractor. And again, it comes through to early engagement. And I think where you're seen as more a partner in the process and you can go open book, you know, it's, Ed alluded to it earlier, it's where the risk is shared as well. And it's not passed down the line. So it's not passed from client to main contractor to subcontractor. I think where there is an early view and establishment of where the risk is, de-risking a project wherever possible, and actually, you know, accepting that there is a shared risk, then, you know, those are the most successful projects. Yeah,
fair comment. More of a commissioning approach to it. And I think it was Ed that mentioned that wonderful tool, cost engineering. Oh no, value engineering, I think you said, David, wasn't it? Okay. Can I pass that on to Ed?
Yeah. Look, if I obviously speak regularly to our members, and procurement comes up time and time again, as you kind of expect, which is a shame in a way, because it's the thing that creates that interface between public and private sectors, or private and private. You know, it's a thing that should build us, you know, bring us together. But we've just lost our way with it, haven't we? You know, with all the rules and regulations, and there's no point blaming Europe. There never was, to be true. It's most of this is to do with the way individuals operate this. There's some great procurers up there. You know, procurement, there was never such a thing when I was training early on. It didn't exist. It's something that's evolved from somewhere. But, you know, it is about creating that interface between. The rules have just gone a little bit mad, I think, and the way people apply them has gone a little bit mad. We've lost sight of the relationships and the collaboration, and back to what's been said already, really the way we manage risk across those interfaces. And unless we get that right, you know, dealing with skills is a really big issue because we can't get that.
Data and stats never make any sense.
Hello, sorry.
I had Helen ring me this morning.
I'm sorry. I
She
think
said, and I thought Helen's was going to be straightforward, right? Yeah. And she said, "Oh, right. So
can somebody knock the mic off? Right, thanks. Okay. That was it. So good job they used their proper language then, wasn't it?
I thought she had a complete. She'd had enough of me speaking, so she just thought she'd talk straight over it. No, that's fine. I think the point is though that we've lost our way with procurement, and we've got to get it back. We've got to do it properly, otherwise we won't deal with the smaller contractors properly. It's prohibitive for them to deal with some of these processes. So yeah, we've got to have a real rethink about this, not just technically, but culturally and behaviourally as well.
How do we do it though? I mean, and I agree with you Ed, completely. But you know, as a client, and we, you know, we're a client as a college. We have probably, I don't know, around about £100 million worth of building work on the books at the moment. We want good value for that. So, you know, I mean, how do you balance that? I mean, I love what Nick said about open book tendering. You know, I think there's a balance of risk there. And okay, you know, my background, I'm a surveyor, aren't I? So I would know a little bit around that process. But you know, for people who want one-off buildings or one-off projects, then, or you know, there's tight funding, you know, coming in through the Barnett Formula into Wales to spend on some of this public procurement. How do you balance it?
I do. So, oh, sorry.
Go on, David.
I do think that we have gone down this design and build route. In some ways, we've gone into a bit of a cul-de-sac on that, and we've forgotten to engage on traditional contracts. And I think there is this. Someone said the word about, I think it was yourself, Ed, actually, about risk, and there is this perception that design and build, you are shifting all the risk to a main contractor, and it you know, that isn't real. It's not real. And actually we have forgotten as an industry to engage on traditional contract, on discrete packages of work. And actually, for me, this all becomes very circular, actually. It's the reason why we have an issue with skills. It's the issue why we have an issue in terms of bringing people into the industry, because there's no certainty. And I think when we can get to a more traditional delivery route, I actually do think that there will be greater benefit. I think there's greater value. I think there's better engagement with SME as well. I really do. I think it's all to do with risk and perceived risk, and we have to break that circle. It's a vicious circle at the moment.
Fair comment, James. Ed, you were trying to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I think risk, we've spoken a bit more about that now. But Mark, I think you did mention the other word, which was value. You said about value engineering. So we don't articulate what is really valuable to us very well, do we? I really don't think we do. You know, we kind of say we do. We say value is, you know, it's skills and it's people and it's da-da-da. But actually, then you look at the way the procurement process it doesn't mirror it at all, because it focuses far too much on lowest price. The two things don't go hand in hand. So we have wonderful policies that says what our value parameters are, but then we don't translate them through the procurement process. We have to get that right. For me, that sits alongside risk. Get the value right, get the risk right, and so many other things fall into place, you know?
Yeah, Helen.
Yeah, good example of that. The point that Ed was making there is if we look at some of the things that haven't changed because we haven't expressed in contracts or used contracts as the expression of what is valuable to us. And I do understand that I'm coming from a very specific angle of, you know, the client and major project, but let's say one example is the fact that the representation of women in construction has not changed. There are numerous groups and lots of nice meetings, because it hasn't been expressed in terms as one of the areas that might be valuable to us in the contract phase, you know, when you listen, when you talk to the unions, when you talk to you listen to the Construction Leaders Council, they will bemoan the lack of women and indeed ethnic minorities in the construction industry, but they're not helping us. We could do with, what does good look like? Here's a template. And I think there is a gap, you know, for driving change that route, and with some examples of best practice filtering down.
Yeah, it's fair comment, Helen. David.
I think the comment was made about not thinking too much ahead about things. You only have to look at some of the employers' information requirements to see them cut and pasted from previous projects to know that nobody's really given any thought to this. In terms of risk, integrated project insurance would have an awful lot. We all waste thousands of pounds on reinsuring the same thing that's insured over and over and over again, and adds to the complexity of the whole piece. And on the PQ process, which also we dealt with earlier, but wastes so much money, I think initiatives like the Build UK PQ process that standardises a competence assessment standard. And I know only 12 have gone for it at the moment, but it means that as an SME, you do it once, and that's across the piece. And at Visa, we've got a competence assessment standard to be a member, which is not, it doesn't duplicate what the Build UK bit does, because they've already done it. So if you've got that, then we focus on that. Yeah, but can you do the job? Can you actually technically do the job? So many PQ processes ask about your insurance, ask about customer relation policies, but nobody asks, can you actually do the job? And that's the bit we focus on.
Yeah, that sounds eminently too sensible to be adopted, David, to be honest, isn't it? I mean, there is the issue around things like gas safe and so on, you know, where you know, competencies we tested. And I know a couple of years ago there was a real kickback in the sector not to do that in other trade areas, you know, because it seemed to be restricted. But actually, there's got to be a way in which we can ensure competence of people installing millions of pounds worth of kit on site, to be honest. Okay, so I want to bring in perhaps part of the sustainable construction issues. So a question I want to ask is, how can, let's call them sustainable construction solutions in the wider sense, and truly be adopted by the sector, rather than, and we know what it's like at the moment, it's almost a checklist of compliance, isn't it? Have we got this, have we got that, have we got the other, do we tick it off, does this meet approved document L? Yes, great, right, let's get on with it. So how can sustainable construction solutions truly be adopted by industry? And that's from cradle to grave, isn't it? So anybody like to comment on that?
I think for us, Mark, talking from a civils perspective, one of the big materials used is obviously cement, and that is globally one of the biggest energy sappers and contributing factors to global CO2 emissions. And I did read a green paper recently which estimated it could be between 5 and 8%, which sounds huge. Yeah. It's something which, you know, we in the industry still are heavily reliant upon, concrete, cement, and everything, all of the materials which cement gets added into. And I think until, from our perspective, that's somewhere where there needs to be a major focus on looking into and investigating alternative materials, because this is just currently not sustainable.
Yeah, fair comment. And there's a lot, you know, there's a lot about reconstituted material being used in the production of concrete and so on as being a good thing, but we forget about the extraction that's required as well as part of that process, I suppose. Ed.
Yeah, just following on from what Nick said there in terms of the materials, yeah, it is a big issue with tarmac, cement, whatever. But yeah, I'd like to see a lot more clients rewarding those contractors who are maybe, you know, really embracing the circular economy in terms of the reuse of materials. You know, what's to stop us around Wales putting, you know, maybe 6 or 7 recycling centres? We do it for waste, for general waste. Why don't we do it for, you know, for civils and construction waste as well? So there's some hubs, if you like, around Wales. The other thing for me is perhaps a little bit taking a step back. You know, if we're really interested in cradle to grave, then we've got to get the whole life costing issue dealt with at that design, well, probably pre-design stage, really, so that we really do look at that value right through the life of an asset. And again, I don't think our procurement processes are attuned to that at the moment, you know, but we've got to get there, otherwise we'll continue to do the same old thing.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Anyone else to comment? Okay. Oh, sorry, David, come on. Just missed your hand there.
Yeah, sorry. From the building engineering services side, as a focus on does it work. I think you described a tick box mentality. So, have you got solar thermal on the roof, or have you got PV, or have you got a heat pump? And that seems to be the end of the process. The key question is, does it work? Are systems working? Therefore, a greater focus on outputs. At the end, proper commissioning of systems, proper commissioning that actually goes into, have we built the thing we said we were going to build? And that's lacking at the moment. That's the bit that needs to tie it up. And it wouldn't do any harm if somebody was prosecuted for a failure to comply with Part L at some point. That would help a lot.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I think we spoke last week, David, and we were saying it's okay to design and build a building in a certain form, but it's how that building is used after, which has a major impact on it. Yeah. Sorry, James, was that your hand up then?
No, I just in regards to where we're moving, you know, all houses will be looking to achieve EPCA, and we are moving towards that direction now. And again, one of the things that we're finding is viability. It's hurting us. So whilst the sustainability is super important, just throwing in a different kind of, in a different angle onto this is the viability that we're finding at the moment, and trying to get some of this to stack up. I think, you know, David raised it, that fabric first solution is where we need to be going for in the first instance, and then seeing where we land on that. I think one of the concerns that we've got, and is that once we put people into these homes, as you just mentioned, that people don't quite understand how to use them. You know, I've been involved in quite a few passive houses in the past, and they're not quite being used as they should be. And I think there's a whole education piece that needs to happen here as well.
Yeah, I mean, you buy a car and you get a number of books which are manuals and how to do just about everything. And buy a house, and I just did, and I've got a set of keys.
Yeah,
so excellent. Yeah, Ed.
Yes, sorry, I should have added something to the whole life costing, and it picks up on James's points and David's, I think, is how long do you think it'll be before we are not just measuring tenders on price, but on carbon as well? Because, you know, again, unless we do that, we know we need to be rewarding those contractors and consultants who are actually delivering good outputs in terms of carbon management as well as cost/price management. Yeah, maybe that's one for the poll.
Well, we had a couple of questions that's come in, and a lot of them have been circling around this issue. You know, we agree with what you're saying, sort of thing, but who's going to influence the policy makers and the politicians in getting it done? You know, we've some of us have been talking about this for a long time. Some of us are old enough to have gone that full circle, really, to be honest. You know, and it's right, isn't it? You know, because I think that value and cost are completely different things. We talk about engaging local workforces in terms of the procurement process itself. We talk about making it less bureaucratic, and actually we were doing that when I joined the industry in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, so it is concerning, isn't it, you know? And I know things are moving on, but it is definitely concerning, yeah, concerning. Okay, guys, I want to come back to you. We've got about five minutes left. I want to come back to you and ask you at the end for just one takeaway each that people attending this webinar can take with them. Yeah, lots of things that we've covered today. Can I just ask a general final question? And from what's been happening today, we are obviously seeing a major change in the adoption of technologies in construction, and hence the title of the webinar, constructing the future. But so we're seeing new construction methods, we're seeing new design and new design processes, we're seeing different building regulations and huge changes in planning policies. So we must all be really happy that everything's progressing in the right direction. Then we've got it all covered, have we? And who can I pick on? Let me pick on David.
Yeah, everything's rosy in the garden. Go back to Grenfell and the Hackett review that says actually it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah,
it's behaviours that need to change. Actually, if we get the behaviours right, and we all have the ambition of building something that's going to be around for many years. And 90% of people spend 90% of their time in a building. Therefore, if you do it right, the societal benefits in terms of physical and mental well-being are huge. So we should do this properly. And we just need all to have the same ambition. Not, I think James said it's return on capital employed. Shouldn't be driving force. It should be, if you put something in for planning, you deliver the thing you put in for planning, and it works. And if you get it right for carbon and for energy, that's pretty good tell that it works across the piece. It's almost impossible to design something crap just for energy. It's out in energy, it's out in everything. So I'd focus on that.
Fair comment. Anybody else want to join you there, Helen?
Well, I'm just very struck by someone's, so it's not directly answering your question, well, but in true style, but it just struck by one of the questions that came through on the chat about, okay, we all agree, who do we lobby? Where are the powers that can do this? And I think that is so key, because we know that there are national agendas around, especially post-COVID, around recovery, whatever, levelling up. We know that they're really key, and we've got net zero. So I think that if there was one takeaway for me, and it's about identifying the button that we need to press. We are pressing it into the National Infrastructure Commission, EDF is, because the National Infrastructure Commission, which takes the infrastructure pipeline out of Treasury and does not at the moment have any of its remit, does not cover employment skills. So it's as if delivery of major projects is divorced from the people that do it, yet they are one half of the productivity equation. So yes, if those on the call can lobby for that point, for central thinking, for as one of the major risks of delivery being workforce, then that would be for me a really, really good takeaway.
Yeah, thanks very much, Helen, and yeah, all of these require brave decisions by politicians. I think that was Humphrey who said that, wasn't it? Okay, can I ask you for, as Helen did, the 1 point for people to take away from this today, and can I go to David after Helen? David, what one thing would you want people to take away from today?
Well, I'd already done that actually. I think focus on outputs, because that drives the whole process. So about behaviours and outputs, if you get it right along completely throughout the supply chain, then you'll deliver the thing that you put in for planning. And if you do that, then you need good skills. You need to pay people properly. You need to do all the things that help deliver that. So it's a key.
Thanks, David. James, one thing.
The speed in which we're changing as an industry, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It just seems to be every single week there seems to be something different, and it's difficult. It's really difficult to keep a handle on.
Any constant is change. Yeah, Nick.
For me, Mark, I think I'm a huge advocate of modular, and I think interestingly, something I did want to mention earlier was I think something we're perhaps not thinking about is with a factory-built environments, that the manufacturing process could actually become robotic in the future, and that could solve the skill shortage very nicely.
Yeah, fair comment. Ed.
Yeah, difficult to knock this down into one, isn't it, Mark? But I think I'll follow on the behaviours route again. I think, if you look at the technology that we're using here today, this has been around for a while. It's taken a COVID pandemic to really force us into this route. The technology is moving ahead. It's just us that are struggling to keep up with it. So we've got to change our behaviours, and don't wait for somebody else to tell you to do it through policy, whatever. Do it. We're all intelligent people. Get on and do some of this yourself.
Thanks very much, Ed. Spot on. And I think for me, as somebody from the construction industry, and now an educator, it really is for us engaging with employers to find out exactly what skills they want, and to keep that engagement going so that we can actually meet those skills needs, and try to really almost crystal ball gaze in terms of what those skills needs are going to be. So everyone, it's 11:32. We're 2 minutes over. Apologies for that. I know everyone gets, I think the expression is zoomed out. But can I have a huge thanks to our panel today, who've done incredibly well in answering some of the questions and debating the questions today. I'm sure there's lots more questions for people to ask, and there is some things in the chat to say that we will try and pick those up. Thanks to everyone who's attended today. A large number of people attended this conference today. So thanks very much, everyone. Do have our own, and stay safe, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you.